I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us a brand new guest. And given the geopolitical situation in the world and here in America and over in Russia and Ukraine, it's a great time to have him on. And many people have asked me to have him on. He is Dmitry Orlov of cluborlov.com. Dmitry Orlov, thank you for joining us today on USA Watchdog.
Thank you for having me.
You know, you've been writing, blogging. You consider yourself a blogger. And your topic is blogging about the collapse of America, and you've been doing it since the mid-2000s. And I'm sure back in that time, a lot of people thought, oh, collapse of America, get out of here. Now, today in 2014, well, not so far-fetched. And you had a lot of experience with the USSR. You grew up there. You were born there. And you watched the USSR financially collapse back in the day. And you say, we're basically on the same trajectory. And now a lot of people probably wouldn't argue with you. Tell me briefly, why do you think we're on the same trajectory, and how close are we, the U.S., to collapsing?
Well, the trajectory is defined by this sort of incompetent militarism, where more and more money results in bigger and bigger military fiascos around the world, and less of an actual foreign policy that can be articulated or pursued. Massive levels of corruption, the amount of money being stolen via the U.S. government and its various appropriation processes is now in the trillions of dollars a year. Runaway debt. The United States now has a level of debt that is unrepayable. All we're waiting for is for the interest rates to go across the magic threshold of 3%, and suddenly the entire budget explodes, the budget of the country. And also all sorts of other tendencies that tend to point in the direction of collapse, of systemic failure at all levels.
Well, I got to ask you that when you take a look at the U.S., where we are right now, how close are we to the collapse scenario? Some people thought we were going to collapse in 11 or 12. A lot of people have said, wow, this has gone on. I mean, PhD people, this has gone on a lot longer than I thought it would go on. Where do you think we are in the collapse scenario?
Well, I'm pretty sure that anyone who makes a prediction about when the collapse will happen is wrong. So at a meta level, making predictions like that is sort of a fool's game. Nobody knows when it's going to happen. Same as you can say that say a bridge is structurally deficient, but you don't know when a truck is going to fall through into the river below. Nobody can pinpoint things with that kind of accuracy, because tendencies tend to accumulate over time, and you don't know what the trigger is going to be, what the triggering event is going to be, which crisis will prove fatal. It is just like you can have a sick person be chronically sick for a really long time, and then one day they basically go into a coma, or their heart stops. You can't predict what day that's going to happen.
Well, if you can't predict what day it's going to happen, you sure can say whether or not we're far away or closer. And when you started blogging in 2004 or 5 about the collapse of America, you probably thought it was closer than what it really was. And I'm not trying to get you to make a prediction, but is the window shortening in your mind? Does it look shorter with the $17.4 trillion cash deficit, the $200 trillion commitments and debt and obligations we have? Is it looking shorter to you, the scenario?
Well, basically, the United States right now, from my point of view and from the point of view of a lot of observers around the world, is on suicide watch. It's a country that's going to self-destruct at some point in the near future. And when that's going to happen, it would be unkind to say.
Okay, and what do you think about, let's get into, your homeland, Russia, and or USSR when you grew up there, but Russia now, and the Ukraine and Crimea situation. I think it's Krem in Russian. You can probably say it correctly. I probably just butchered it. But
it's Krim.
Okay, good. Tell me that situation. What do you think is going on there?
Well, I think that the fact that the Crimean referendum took place, it's basically the first lawful way of figuring out what the people there want to do. And the people voted overwhelmingly. The turnout was remarkable, very high, and they voted overwhelmingly to join Russia again, to become part of Russia once again. The interesting thing about that is that not just the Russians voted to join Russia, but the Ukrainians in Crimea, which make up a sizable chunk of the population, voted to join Russia, and the Crimean Tatars, who were initially against, at least their representatives were against joining Russia. Their membership, the actual ethnic minority, voted to join Russia and be within Russian Federation, along with their brothers in Tatarstan, the Republic of Tatarstan, which is part of Russia. So if that pattern holds and more referendums take place throughout the Russian part of Ukraine, Ukraine is composed of kind of a no man's land in the west, and then Russian territories in the east. They were always Russian territories. They were granted to Ukraine by Lenin and by Khrushchev for all kinds of strange or non-existent reasons. So if that trend holds, then you're basically left with this insolvent nugget of nothingness, and it'll be up to the international community to decide what to do with these people who are, right now marching around Kiev, intimidating people, waving around baseball bats and breaking into government offices and beating up members of local governments and installing their own members as authorities. They're basically running amok. They don't even have support of the Ukrainian military at this point. So it'll be a mop-up operation against these neo-fascists that are running amok.
What do you think when you hear our government, the White House, say that it's illegitimate, that the U.S. government and the world government will never recognize the referendum in Crimea, that it's illegal, that it's you heard the interim prime minister saying that, hey, what's wrong with the world? Somebody just came in and took our land. What do you think when you hear that kind of rhetoric coming from the West?
Well, basically, in Washington, we have, and in the Obama administration and the Kerry State Department in particular, we have absolutely breathtaking levels of incompetence. These people really don't know what they're doing, and they're dangerous at any speed. And then everywhere else in the quote-unquote Western world, we have this follow the incompetent leader thing taking place, which is really, really frightening because, the incompetents are leading the world to a very dangerous place. And what are these people doing, trash-talking the Russians? What would this country do without Russia? How would they get out to Earth orbit and visit the International Space Station? Who would negotiate international deals with countries like Syria and Iran on their behalf because they're so hopeless at negotiating? All they can do is, blunder and lose face. What would this country do without Russia? And why are they upsetting Russia to a point where Russia will stop cooperation, will hold cooperation? Because if you turn it around, Russia doesn't need the United States for anything. The United States is the most dispensable country on earth. All Russia really wants of the United States is that the United States keep out of world affairs and tend to itself, which it is in dire need of doing.
What do you think about the scenario where I just saw a story on, that the Ukrainian military are not going to leave Crimea and that they are preparing to fight? That's going to be ugly and bloody, and my money's on the Russians.
Well, they're not going to fight because the Ukrainian military is part of the Russian military. There isn't really any opposition. The Ukrainian military in a few days will decide what to do, and then they will inform the Russians. And after that, maybe they'll inform their own government, maybe by just going into the government offices and rounding them up. Last I heard is that 60% of the Ukrainian military representatives in Ukraine accepted Russian passports already. The remaining part that didn't really want to do that, they're being shipped out to the mainland. And that's happening peacefully. They're getting on buses and they're going back to Ukraine. So there isn't going to be any fight. But the thing that you really have to understand is that the Ukrainian military all over Ukraine does not support the government in Kiev. They're withholding support and they're withholding cooperation. And what they really want is to join the Russian military.
This is my theory. My theory is, there's a school of thought that says, well, they'll just divide the country. And I'm thinking, this is a country a little smaller than the size of Texas, so you're going to give up you're going to have a NATO country on the border of Russia, and Russia's going to let that go. It's just to me, it's almost like they want to start a war. Because how can don't they understand? I'm wondering that my thought process is they want to still have a NATO country on the border of Russia. Are they trying to start a war? Would Russia allow that to happen?
Well, the framework for administering a region like that, and Ukraine is just a region, it's not really a country. For administering a region like that, it's a federated structure, and that federated structure is called the Russian Federation. It has all kinds of pieces in it. It has Tatarstan in it, which is an Islamic republic not very far from Moscow. It has Chechnya in it, which is largely autonomous and governed in a way that is quite different from the way the rest of the country is governed because it has very different traditions. So there's an obvious way to incorporate Western Ukraine inside Russian Federation on terms that Western Ukrainians would like. They would get to speak Ukrainian. They would get to send their children to Ukrainian schools. They can pretty much do whatever they want. The only thing they can't really do is run around with baseball bats and shoot civilians, because that's against the law.
And they can't allow NATO to put missiles inside Western Ukraine. I mean, that's a non-starter, isn't it?
Well, that's not going to happen because, you see, in order to be accepted into NATO, a country has to be in control of its territory, and the Ukrainian government is not in control of its territory.
So you think the Ukrainian military will put the kibosh on the whole deal, and ultimately Ukraine, in one form or another, the entire country, will be under the umbrella of the Russian Federation?
Yes, the best case scenario is that the Ukrainian and the Russian troops merge, fraternize, exchange notes, sort out the command structure, and move forward, and without any shots fired. And that's been the pattern so far. I mean, the shots that have been fired have been warning shots in just a few instances. There have been a few provocations, but nothing huge. The Ukrainian military is not allowing weapons to go to the National Guard that the government in Kiev is hastily trying to organize out of street thugs, the demonstrators that threw Molotov cocktails. They're trying to get them to form some kind of a National Guard. That's not working very well because the Ukrainian military is withholding cooperation, and also because these thugs, their credentials consist of bigotry and hate. And that's not really good credentials for any stated purpose. So that effort is failing as well. And this is all against the background of complete and total fiscal failure on the part of Ukraine and debt default, which is more or less automatic at this point, because the debt level isn't going down, but the GDP is going down. So at some point you reach a magic ratio where all of these debts have to be called in. And so that's going to happen automatically. There's nobody about to bail Ukraine out. So basically, the Russians can just sit back, relax, and watch this thing work itself out. But I don't believe that the government in Kiev has any legs.
What about the increasing sanctions? I mean, they came out with some puffballs. I think sanctioning like a couple of dozen individual people, not even Putin. The Obama administration. What do you think of these sanctions and them ratcheting them up? Is the United States, serious? And do you think that this is something that could tip the U.S. into a collapse if Russia stops using the dollar and accepts all currencies for selling its oil and natural gas? Is that something that could tip the U.S. into a mess? Well,
this is like, this sanctions nonsense. It's like watching. A slightly senile elderly couple fight. It's nothing really at all. The first round of sanctions made the Russian officials laugh. But if they keep pushing, which I don't think they will, I think that what they're really hoping is they made some token gesture, right? So now they're done. They made their token gesture. They can go and play golf. And I hope that that's what they're going to do. If they do keep pushing, then Russians could withhold cooperation. They already announced that they're calling force majeure on some military cooperation, on some military inspections that should be happening according to the START treaty. But they could also withhold cooperation in the critical transshipment of material to Afghanistan. See, most of the resupply for the troops, the NATO and American troops in Afghanistan, goes through Russia with Russian consent. those troops are supposed to be leaving this year. The the routes, the evacuation routes, there are two of them. One goes through Pakistan, and we all know how reliable that is. The other one goes through Russia, and it's 100% reliable. So if Americans push enough with the sanctions, then the entire effort of pulling out of Afghanistan turns into a rout, and it's going to be like the evacuation of Saigon times 1,000.
Whoa, that's a new piece of information. Yes, sir. So you're saying that you don't think there's going to be any more sanctions because there's all these military cooperations, particularly in Afghanistan.
The administration is foolish and incompetent, but they're not quite that suicidal yet.
So your appraisal of what's going to go on in Ukraine is there's going to be no war, and ultimately, it may a month or maybe a year or whatever, ultimately Ukraine will be under the umbrella of the Russian Federation in some form or another.
Well, yes, because the feeling that I get is that Ukrainians, most of them, really like Russia. There's some radicalized thugs running around. They broke into armories. They stole a bunch of AK-47s. They're terrorizing the population. That is only pushing the population in the direction of Russia. And what's going to happen is not some military conflict, but a mop-up operation against roving bands of thugs. And that's going to be the end game of this thing. And then peace and law and order will be restored.
And it'll probably be not the Russian military, but the Ukrainian military will say, okay, we've had enough.
There will be very little distinction between the two as events move forward.
Very enlightening, Dmitry Orlov. Very enlightening. And you're, in terms of the U.S., in terms of our situation, with the debt ceiling, it's unlimited, and our $17 trillion debt, and we still have, all these wars going on. You think that the window, and I'm not asking you for exact prediction, but you think the window is getting closed in terms of collapse, the window of time?
Well, yeah, it's all you can do in a case like that is resort to various medical metaphors, like you don't know when the patient is going to go, when the diabetic is going to lapse into a coma. You can't really predict when that exactly is going to happen. You can have total certainty that it will happen. And so that's what we're looking at. At some point, this money printing and handing it out to your friend's scheme is going to fail. It just has to. Things that can't go on forever don't.
Dmitry Orlov of cluborlov.com. Dmitry Orlov, I hope you come back. Very enlightening. You gave us information, perspective that we just couldn't get anywhere else. Thank you, sir, for joining us today on USA Watchdog.
Thank you very much.